When the Second World War ended in 1945, the world finally took a breath, but that breath was filled with smoke. Cities across Europe lay in ruins. Millions were dead. And in that silence of victory, two powers emerged from the ashes: the United States of America and the Soviet Union. They had fought together against Nazi Germany, but their friendship was built on necessity, not trust. As soon as Hitler's empire collapsed, the world split again, not by bombs this time, but by beliefs. The United States stood for democracy and capitalism, a world of open markets, freedom, and private enterprise. The Soviet Union stood for communism, a classless society ruled by collective power and strict control. Two dreams, two systems, one fragile planet. The tension between them was invisible but everywhere, whispered in speeches, drawn on maps, and printed in newspapers. No war had been declared, but both nations knew this was only the beginning of a new kind of war. A war without battlefields, fought through fear, spies, and the silent threat of the atomic bomb. In August 1945, the world had witnessed horror unlike any other. The atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki had ended one war and begun another. America had proven its ultimate weapon. The Soviet Union wanted one too. By 1949, they had it. And suddenly, the world realized one wrong move could end humanity. The late 1940s became a time of paranoia and propaganda. School children in America practiced duck-and-cover drills under their desks. Families built bomb shelters in their backyards. Movies and posters warned citizens to watch out for communists. The Red Scare had begun. In Washington, Senator Joseph McCarthy became the face of fear, accusing actors, teachers, even generals of being Soviet spies. Careers were destroyed. Trust was shattered. In a way, fear itself became a weapon. While the people trembled, the superpowers began their global chess game. Europe was divided by an iron curtain, a term coined by Winston Churchill in 1946. To the west lay freedom. To the east, the shadow of Soviet influence. In response, America formed the Marshall Plan, sending billions in aid to rebuild Western Europe, not just out of kindness, but strategy. A strong, prosperous Europe meant a strong barrier against communism. The Soviet Union saw this as an act of aggression, economic warfare. The Cold War had officially taken shape. In 1949, the tension turned physical. The Soviet-backed communist forces won in Korea, forming the People's Republic of China under Mao Zedong. The balance of power shifted. America felt surrounded. The U.S. responded by forming NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, a military alliance to protect the West. In reply, the Soviets would later form their own bloc, the Warsaw Pact. Then came 1950. On a quiet Korean peninsula, the Cold War turned hot. North Korea, supported by the Soviets and later China, invaded South Korea. The United States and the United Nations intervened. For the first time, the two ideologies clashed with real blood. The Korean War was brutal. Millions dead, families divided, cities burned to ashes. And after 3 years of fighting, the borders ended up almost exactly where they began. Nothing changed, except the world's realization this rivalry could destroy everything. Back home, America's culture began to shift. The 1950s brought television, rock and roll, and the dream of suburban peace. But beneath the calm smile of the American dream, there was always the hum of the atomic clock. Every technological achievement, from jet planes to space satellites, carried a military shadow. Even science became a weapon. In 1957, the Soviet Union launched Sputnik, the first satellite in space. For the first time, an American child could look up at the night sky and see proof. The enemy was above them. Fear turned to urgency. President Eisenhower responded by creating NASA, and the space race began. The Cold War was no longer just about land or bombs. It was about the future of humanity. By the early 1960s, both sides had nuclear arsenals powerful enough to destroy the planet many times over. And when John F. Kennedy took office, he inherited a world trembling between pride and panic. The stage was set for one of the most dangerous moments in human history, the Cuban Missile Crisis, the point where the Cold War nearly turned into World War III.
October 1962. The world held its breath. A small island, only 90 miles from the coast of Florida, became the center of the universe, Cuba. American spy planes had discovered Soviet nuclear missiles being built there, each one capable of reaching Washington, New York, or Chicago in minutes. For 13 days, the world stood on the edge of nuclear war. President John F. Kennedy faced off against Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev. No one slept. No one knew if tomorrow would come. In secret meetings and tense negotiations, messages flew back and forth. American ships formed a blockade around Cuba. Soviet submarines lurked beneath the waves. Every second felt like the last. But, in the end, humanity stepped back from the cliff. Khrushchev agreed to remove the missiles, and Kennedy quietly promised to withdraw American missiles from Turkey. The crisis ended, but both leaders knew there might not be another escape next time. The world had looked into the abyss and survived. After Cuba, a strange calm fell over the world, not peace, but exhaustion. Both sides began to realize if this Cold War ever turned hot, there would be no winners. So, the race changed direction. From weapons to influence, from destruction to control. The 1960s and 70s became a battlefield of culture, ideology, and space. America sent men to the moon. The Soviets celebrated their own victories in science and sport. Every success was a message, our system works better. But beneath the competition, people on both sides dreamed of something simpler, a world without fear. In America, the Cold War years were also a time of transformation. The civil rights movement rose. While the government fought communism abroad, its own citizens were fighting for equality at home. Martin Luther King Jr. marched through Washington as the world watched. His dream of freedom and justice echoed beyond America's borders, a reminder that true power comes from moral courage, not nuclear stockpiles. Meanwhile, the war that America could not escape, Vietnam, dragged on. It was meant to stop the spread of communism, but it became a wound, splitting the nation, shaking its faith, and showing the world that even a superpower could bleed. Television brought war into every living room. The images of burning villages and fallen soldiers became symbols of doubt. For many Americans, the greatest enemy wasn't the Soviet Union. It was the fear that they might no longer be the heroes. As the 1970s dawned, both nations searched for balance. Talks of détente, a relaxation of tension, began. Leaders signed treaties to limit nuclear weapons. Handshake photos filled newspapers. But in the shadows, the rivalry never died. Every spy mission, every coded message, every whisper in the dark reminded the world peace was only temporary. In 1979, the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan. It was meant to be quick. It became their Vietnam. The United States secretly armed Afghan rebels, turning the desert into another silent battlefield of the Cold War. And in that chaos, a new generation of militants learned to fight, a legacy that would shape the future in unexpected ways. By the 1980s, the world had changed again. A new president, Ronald Reagan, entered the White House, confident, charismatic, and determined to end the Cold War on America's terms. He called the Soviet Union an evil empire. He rebuilt the military, poured billions into defense, and launched the Strategic Defense Initiative, a plan to build lasers and satellites that could stop nuclear missiles. Many saw it as fantasy, but in Moscow, it felt like a threat. Then came Mikhail Gorbachev, a new kind of Soviet leader, young, bold, and willing to change. He introduced glasnost, openness, and perestroika, reform. He loosened the chains of the old Soviet system and, without realizing it, began its collapse. Walls began to crack, literally. In 1989, after decades of division, citizens of East Germany rose up. They climbed over the Berlin Wall, the very symbol of the Cold War. Families reunited. Tears fell like rain. And the world cheered, because it wasn't just a wall that fell. It was fear itself. 2 years later, in 1991, the Soviet Union, once the mightiest empire on Earth, ceased to exist. Its flag lowered for the last time over the Kremlin. 15 new nations emerged from its shadow. The Cold War was over. No treaties, no fireworks, just silence. A 45-year war, fought through fear, pride, and power, had ended without a single nuclear shot. For America, it was victory, but also reflection. The enemy had vanished, but the world remained fragile, haunted by the weapons both sides had built. The Cold War left scars not on land, but in minds. A generation that learned to live under the shadow of destruction and still chose to dream. In the quiet after the storm, the story of the Cold War became a lesson that power without wisdom is peril, and fear without understanding is madness. The world survived the Age of Fire not because of strength, but because, in the end, people remembered to be human.